My grandfather, George Anker, married his wife, Trude Gottschalk, in 1921. My grandfather's parents were Henrietta Anker, born Meyer, and his father was Simon Anker, born in 1845. My daughter Julia's second name, Simone, is in honor of Simon Anker. Danzig was a beautiful city with its Hanseatic architecture. The Anker family was in the grain business in Danzig. Danzig was a port city and there was much import-export business. On the upper right is the family's grain silo. The business was founded by Simon Anker in 1871. To the left is the Great Synagogue of Danzig. Whereas my grandfather's family was from a large city, my grandmother Trude came from Schlawe in Pomerania. This is the family mill. It was known as the Schlawe Mill. There was a river that ran through it. The family used to get eels from the river and smoke them. In the upper left-hand corner is a little garden where my grandmother played as a child. This is my grandmother on the left and her sister Kata in about 1896. These are the great-grandparents of my grandmother, Henrietta and Jacob Gottschalk. The family can trace its ancestry to the early 1700s. This is Jacob and Henrietta's son, Benno Gottschalk, at age 16. He was born in 1832. He founded the Schlawe Mill. This is Benno's first wife, Nanny Hyman. She was the mother of my great-grandfather Hugo Gottschalk. Hugo and Bertha were well-to-do. This is at their time of their marriage in 1888. They had 4 children, Nanny, Bruno, Kata, and my grandmother, Trude. Here are 4 generations of the Gottschalk family. From the left, Nanny, Ozol, her daughter, Hannah, Nanny's grandmother, Nanny's mother Bertha, and Lou, now known as Michael, who lives in Israel on Kibbutz Mayan Tzvi. The years on the mill in the late 1800s and early 1900s were happy ones for the family. My grandmother was particularly close to her elder sister Kata, here seen with her son Günther. As stated earlier, my grandparents married in 1921 in Schlawe. They moved the same year to Berlin, a bustling city. My mother grew up at Klopstockstrasse 17 in the Tiergarten district. Here's their dining room. This is the study, and this is the salon. This is my mother Hilda with her mother Gertrude in the Tiergarten circa 1926. The 3 girls had a relatively happy childhood with family and friends. This is my mother on her first day of school, circa 1932. There were excursions to the outskirts of Berlin. Here's an excursion in Grünheide. Eva on the left, Dodi, third from left, and my mother, second from right. The carefree days, however, were short-lived, for Hitler took power in 1933. Berlin was a large city. This is Alexanderplatz, where my grandfather had his business. This is the Brandenburger Tor. Berlin had been an exciting city, full of culture and art. But in 1933, the decrees against the Jews began. Nazi banners and flags appeared throughout the city. These are pictures that appeared in the National Geographic in 1937. Decrees came out almost daily against the Jews. There was a boycott of German businesses that were owned by Jews. 8 weeks after the Nazis had assumed power, Jewish children were expelled from the German public schools. Jews were humiliated by the Nazis on the street. Heinrich and Paul decided to leave Danzig. It was reported in the New York Times. My mother's cousin, Brigitte Anker, now Kaufmann, explains.
Being natives or having the passport of Danzig, we did not have the currency restrictions that German Jews had. We could live as we had. Therefore, we came here on a so-called capitalist visa. In other words, we could support ourselves for the next 5 years before we became citizens. Otherwise, you're left with 10 marks in your pocket.
This is the front of the Danziger synagogue shortly before the family left.
What happened the next day, or where this Jew would be the following day?
People behaved as well as they could and did whatever they could do. And slowly but surely, one after the other, they were leaving. Not always the safe havens, but what they thought was first step at least.
Although my grandfather had served in World War I and had been awarded the Iron Cross twice, he would not be protected. He soon realized after his 3 brothers had left Germany that he too should immigrate with his family. He was forced to sell his men's clothing manufacturing facility to his Aryan partner, as he was no longer to be employed. My grandparents, mother and aunts were in Berlin on the night of November 9th and 10th, 1938, when 280 synagogues and more than 7,000 Jewish business establishments were destroyed or badly damaged. The Nazis called the pogrom Reichskristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. 30,000 Jews were deported to concentration camps. My grandmother's friend, Rose Lovald, explains how it was the night after Kristallnacht.
They throw merchandise in the streets and all those things. I have seen that when I went to buy something for Klaus. He needed something. And so I came into the Wilmersdorfer Straße, which was a very good street for buying clothing and everything. So how they were chasing Jews through the street. And and I saw that they had thrown out material, all the material in the streets out of their Jewish stores. Street where they had a lot of good stores on food, and I saw them chasing the Jews through the street, and they would, I saw one who had a light or something or fire on his pants, and that man was running.
My grandparents decided that even though they might not be able to get out of Germany on a visa, that they would send their 3 daughters on a kindertransport to London. Children under the age of 18 were allowed, without a visa, to go from Germany to London. This was arranged by the British government. Luckily, my grandfather had not given up his Danziger passport, and thus it did not have the J that would signify him as a Jew, and therefore prevent him from leaving the country. My grandfather had a friend in the Polish consulate who called him one night in July 1939 and informed him that his Danziger passport would be taken away. If this were to happen, he would be unprotected, so he went home and told his wife Trude, "Tonight we're leaving Germany." Their passport marks the date they left Germany, July 8, 1939, where they arrived in Denmark. They left from Flughafen Berlin-Tempelhof, the major airport in Berlin. Grandfather's friend, Rosa Lowald, remembers when they decided to leave Germany.
The grandpa had to go to see that he gets the permission to get out of Germany, and he shouldn't have money with him. But the man from Denmark, who was that first? Yeah, that was Denmark. Wanted to know if he has money to live here, and I know. Grandpa told us, he said, I told him, take us over, then I tell you, because he had, but he can't see it in front of the Germans. He shouldn't have any, you know. That I know at the time, the children were already outside, and the parents came on a special evening. He came home and he said, where do we live today?
Yeah, that's because after my grandparents left Tempelhof Airport, seen here in Berlin, they arrived in Copenhagen, Denmark. After a short stay in Copenhagen, they made their way to London, and the family was reunited once again. Here is a scene of the family in England after their arrival. My mother is at the right. This photo was taken in Broadstairs, England in 1939. My grandmother is at the upper left-hand corner. Next to her is her daughter Dodie. In the lower right hand is my mother's cousin Wolfgang Gray. Next to him is Heinz Karplus. My mother is in the front, and on the far left in the front is my grandfather George. The family left London in September 1940, arriving in Boston, Massachusetts on October 5th, 1940. Freedom was finally found. This is the ship the family traveled on to America, the SS Nova Scotia. What follows is an interview with my mother Hilda and Aunt Eva about their childhood in Berlin and their arrival in the United States of America. It was filmed in June 1990 in Los Angeles, almost 50 years after their arrival in Boston, Massachusetts.
My maiden name was Anker. I was born, gives a date, June 6, 1922 in Berlin, Germany. I lived there until June 14th, 1939.
And I'm Hilda Anker Fogelson, and I was born May the 29th, 1926 in Berlin, and I left with Eva in June 1939.
I wanted to know what your memories of your childhood were like? Were they happy? I mean, up until the Hitler era. If you, like, what in Berlin, what it was like? Did you have a lot of family there? Did you have, what type of things did you do? I know you said you went to museums and things like that.
We had a very happy childhood. Our father and mother were very loving and caring, and were always taking us different places. On sunny afternoons or mornings, on Sundays we went to the zoo, and on rainy days we went to the museum. We went for long walks in the woods with our cousins, Heinz and Else, and Uncle Dietmar and Tante Rosa. We had lots of company. Also, our father's other sister, Trude, lived in Berlin, and I always remember that she came over on Sundays.
I think Eva is right. I think it was a happy childhood, but I think there was a shadow in some ways over our lives. I can't really say that it was completely happy, because I know from the very young age I was told you don't act loud on the street, you don't wear bright colors. I wanted to wear a big red hair bow in my hair. My mother would say no, that in German she would say das sehr ausfallend, is that the word? And I know just little things that I knew I couldn't do, and also when it came that I should, probably I recall mostly when I was 9 or 10 years old, I couldn't go on to the public high school. I had to go to a Jewish school, and my father was very loving, and my mother and my father always told me I was really very smart and I wouldn't have any problem going to this school, and the test I wouldn't have to worry about. But then he said they just might give you trouble, and so he got me a coach that I would pass this test with high marks. And some friend of Eva's, her husband, I think it was, he was a professor or Studienrat. He coached me in math and in English, in German grammar, and I did pass it very well. And then the next day I get another letter because I was Jewish. I couldn't go to this high school. So I think we had such a happy memories because our parents were very loving and supported us and always told us we were beautiful and we were smart and we were athletic and we were artistic, and we were all, even probably those things weren't true, they just made us feel good.
I think the difference comes in that when Hilda says she was 8 or 9, I was already 13 and 14.
Wow.
So my childhood until 1933, until Hitler came into power, was very carefree. I did get into the German high school and had a good time there until I was into, I think, the 3rd year in high school, what was called Unter Tertia, and I was on the swimming team and I'd always gotten an A in swimming. Suddenly they told me Jewish girls do not do well in sports. So they wouldn't give me an A in swimming anymore. And even my teacher, who seemed to like me very much, apologized and said, but if she did anything different, she would lose her job. And then a year after Hilda had started in the Jewish school, our other sister also went to the Jewish school, and I decided I didn't want to be left, even though I had many friends in the German school, in the Lyceum. But I did not leave the Lyceum until Obertertia, and only really went to the Jewish school. I was 15 already.
So you were That's true. I think that
that
age, when you're
you know,
little, makes a big difference.
right.
Now it
Between-
makes no difference.
Right.
But these,
Once we both got married, I think, then the difference wasn't there. But while you were in college and I was working, it also made a difference.
here are some pictures. Where were these taken?
These were taken in the suburbs of
Show it
Berlin,
to the camera.
and
Like where?
at one of the lakes, which was called Petsee.
And
Yeah.
did you?
Wasn't this in Rauchwangswerde?
You're right. No, this I think it was in Grünheide,
Oh.
on Petsee.
And
It's a Löwitz.
and when did? How often would you go? Was that right in Berlin? Just for the day you would go there?
No, my parents would rent a house for the summer. This, I think, was in Heringsdorf
Uh-huh.
at the beach.
So you would spend
Mhm.
you would spend a couple weeks there, or?
Mostly all summer vacations, and then our father would come either on the weekends and maybe twice during the week. But Omama would stay with us.
Tell me about your house in Berlin, what the neighborhood was like, and
We lived what was called the Hansaviertel, which was sort of in the center of Berlin, near the Tiergarten.
Which was a big park, kind of like Griffith Park that had a zoo in it. It was a beautiful area, I think, to grow up. It was safe. One thing about it, it was very safe. Even in those days, I could go on which was a subway, and then it became an elevated train, and we could go for miles, and we would go by ourselves. I was 10 years old. I'd go all over Berlin. Nobody was afraid.
what was your house like? The interior? Do you remember?
Our house was an apartment, and we were on the first floor, and it was very large and had large rooms. We had
high ceilings.
high ceilings. They had a living room and a dining room and a salon.
There
And
was a baby grand piano in there.
and I think it was considered very, very forward-looking. We had bathrooms with bathtubs and shower over the bathtub.
Did you have any maids?
We had a cook, and we had a nursemaid, Kindermädchen, a nanny, and until I don't know what the exact year was when Hitler came out with the Nuremberg laws that Jews could only have maids that were over 45 years old.
So September 15th, 1935.
Is that when that law came in?
Jews may not employ in their households female subjects of the state of German or related blood who are under 45 years old.
Right. And then we had a funny old lady who helped my mother in the house, who had a legitimate son who was sort of retarded, and once in a while she would bring him, and we were sort of awestruck with this woman. But she really worked and did all the house cleaning and things.
I remember sometimes they would just come and do the laundry. Some women.
Those were separate. You had a.
I don't know what my mother did because they did all.
Didn't your mother cook?
I don't know. She
Not in the
cooked.
beginning. Afterwards, she cooked, and
She could do
she
it,
always
then,
did
but-
things with us.
That's what we always. And later on, we had a balcony, and it had always pretty flowers, and we always had afternoon coffee there and nice cake. And my grandmother, in the last years, she lived across the street, and my two aunts, Tante Nanny, Tante Käthe, and I know every afternoon when I come home from school, they'd be sitting there, and that really gave us a close feeling of our family too, but on weekends they wouldn't come as much. Then my father would be there and we would do things with his family. And we were very close to all our cousins, and once in a while they would come from Danzig, and then we really would have to go to all the museums and show them everything. But the house, it was an apartment, but our father and mother owned this house. There were 3 floors, and he rented out the other 2.
And there was a pub in the ground floor?
Downstairs.
Did it make a lot of noise? Or
Not
people
really.
there?
No, maybe on New Year's Eve you might hear something.
So when, for instance,
It's more like people would just stop in for a drink after work. It
Work,
wasn't that they
uh-huh.
would be drunk
No,
or whatever.
no.
so when your mother had to let go, like the maid who was under 45, did that register in your mind? Did she tell you what was happening?
Oh yeah, we definitely knew what was going on. The day that Hitler came into power, my mother took us through the whole neighborhood for a walk so that we would know who the Jewish storekeepers were, because in front of every Jewish store stood a man with a placard saying, Germans do not buy or shop in Jewish stores anymore. You should not go in there. So my mother decided those would be the stores that we would go to afterwards, and we had to all remember which were the proper stores for us to shop in.
That was in, it says here, 1933.
That was in
So
April 1933.
So you were 11 years old?
But,
Right.
but the worst was Kristallnacht.
But before you get to that, do you remember, I've seen pictures even like 34, 35, all the swastikas in the street,
Right.
and a lot of banners. Did your classmates in the public schools, did they treat you any differently? Or
They
in the
started
early years?
being cooler as time went on. I had a couple of German girlfriends with whom I used to go bicycle riding in the Tiergarten, and for one reason or another they suddenly were too busy, and they had sports which I couldn't participate in anymore, and things on that order happened.
And you
But the people weren't all that antagonistic.
you said like in the parks, there are certain benches you couldn't use?
They had put yellow benches into the Tiergarten with a J on them, and Jews were supposed to sit on those.
Did you
benches.
sit on those? Or
I did once, and somebody came and asked me why I was sitting there, because that was only for Jews, and I said I was Jewish. But I also remember once having to chase some boys away who were throwing rocks at you.
Yeah, I remember that coming, but that was already when I went to the Jewish school, so I was about 10. So that was 36. And I know that you came down the elevated train on an escalator. I went down, and also that was the time of the Olympic Games in Berlin. And I know that, I guess I always looked very dark. And
Asking for
yeah, it's like some young people came up to me as I came down the elevator and said they wanted my autograph. They thought I was a sports person, and I thought first they were Nazis or something. So I ran away, and then as I was running down the street, these kids were following me and threw rocks at me and called me a Jew or whatever. And I remember Eva, I guess, I don't know where, she must have come down the street to meet me or something, but I remember she being there.
Yeah.
But that
I think we came home from school.
stands out in my mind. That's what I mean. There was kind of a shadow. I mean, I had a good time at the Jewish school, but then the train ride, you never knew what might happen to you. Also, talking about those benches, I remember just before we left, my mother took just me to Wannsee, which is now an infamous place because of the Wannsee Accords, where they really planned the extermination of all the Jews. But at that time it was a resort, and she said, we will go there just before I was going to leave, just something I could do just with her. And we went there, and I still remember she bought me cherries on a bizet, which is sort of a fancy meringue cake. And then she said, well, where are we going now? We couldn't go into the restaurant because Jews weren't allowed. And she said, well, where are we going to eat this? And a bench all said, no Jews allowed. And I thought that was pretty brave of my mother. She said, we're just going to sit here and eat this. And we did, and it's like one of the last memories I have of Berlin, of my mother, but luckily we did see her again, so we were lucky in some ways.
What do you remember, Eva, about the Olympic Games?
My father took me to a couple of events. We saw, I forget the woman's name, who was Jewish.
Helena Meyer, the
Helena
fencer?
Myers do the shot put.
Oh no, she was a fencer.
There was one who did. And then we also watched Jesse Owens run, and of course he was the race that Hitler didn't want to even come to Berlin, but I think the Olympic Games couldn't have gone on unless he had come. And he won so many gold medals, and my father was so excited about, kept on saying, can you see, siehst du den Neger rennen? Der rennt so schnell. And we were all rooting for him. Did you see the black man run? He runs faster than anybody else, and we were all rooting for him to win, and he did. And that was terrible for Hitler, but was good for us. And it was an exciting time because there were so many different nationalities running around in Berlin.
Do you remember any of the parades? Did you ever see Hitler?
I've seen Hitler, and you couldn't avoid it. Every now and then he would march through the streets, and then everything came to a standstill, and you had to stand and watch and
didn't you say,
raise your arm.
Mom, once that you saw him go by and your cousin also said not to?
Yeah, well, we were at home, and this Mr. and Mrs. Bass, she was helping Eva sometimes with her schoolwork, and he was the one who coached me to take this test.
Oh, yeah.
And they were in our house, and they were having afternoon coffee, and they were all saying, you know, how they were not Jewish, they were Gentile, but I guess it was pretty nice of them to just even come to our house. They could have been punished for that. Well, all of a sudden but you still didn't know either how much they would talk about you, so you didn't say anything controversial. And then my cousin, like I said, my aunt lived across the street, and her name was Olzo. She was studying to be a teacher at the time. And she came in to just pass by, I guess, and she was all excited, and she burst out and she said Hitler was just coming by the corner, and everybody made Heil Hitler, and I hid, and I wasn't going to say that, no way. And then she realized there were other people in the living room, and I remember all of us, oh my God, what will happen now? But those people turned out to be very nice. They never said anything, but that was the problem. You really could never say what you felt, except to your own family, to your own, your parents, sisters, grandparents. But I know we sometimes went to our uncle, who was a doctor, a little further away, and they had an apartment which was overlooking the Kaiserdom, where Hitler's parades would go by, and we went there special just to look out the window from his home to see the parades. And then my uncle and my father would both say, well, he's a crazy man, this old past, this is just a crazy thing. And both of them did not want to leave Germany, but finally they both woke up and they did leave. But
not till after really the Kristallnacht.
So all of these terrible things were, all these rules against the Jews in the early 30s, but your father, he thought it would all pass?
It couldn't happen in a country that's civilized like Germany, where Schiller and Goethe were born, and all these philosophers.
So when your other uncles from Danzig, they decided to leave. That was in October 38. You said, do you remember when they passed through Berlin?
They came and stayed with us and with our other aunt, and decided that I remember Uncle Heinrich's family was staying at our house, and I think Paul stayed at Uncle Riekman's, and they, especially...
Where was Uncle Alto?
I don't know where, they had the Raschinskis maybe in Berlin. Tante Lena's sister lived in Berlin too. But they came all over to our house and kept telling my father, who was the youngest brother, that he had to leave too. And he didn't understand what was going on in Berlin, because they're seeing it now that Hitler was going to come into Danzig too and take it over. And it just was no place for him to keep his business going. But being of the Danzig nationality, my father thought he would be protected and could keep his business running, which was a men's clothing, wholesale place.
He also thought that he had been an officer, a lieutenant in the First World War, gave him some immunity, and I've heard that from other people that I've talked to now. I really understand more now, I think, in retrospect, and really maybe understood at that time. But a lot of German Jews thought that, well, they were, well, looked upon in the community and nothing could happen to them. And they really did not know in those days about the death camps. All of this only came out while we were actually in this country. You heard about it, and then even you didn't know till the war ended that Auschwitz existed. And we did know they had concentration camps, but we didn't know that these were camps that they were going to exterminate 6 million of our people. So I think that my father could not comprehend that. I mean, he just didn't think that could happen, and it didn't happen at that time. People were put in camps, but then they would be released. I remember our Rabbi Hirschberg telling me here, who is from Berlin, that he was in a camp just for a couple of weeks, and then he was let go, but he was told, okay, you have to leave the country. But we thought that was just what was happening.
It was one of our, my father's second cousins, the Hazes. Yeah. They also all disappeared. And
but they came back too. And
right.
They were a while.
And then they also had to leave, so and they went to France. I think by the 9th of November 1938, when they broke all the Jewish storefronts and looted the buildings, and at that point a lot of Jews disappeared and were sent to concentration camps. My father had to sell his business. They told him, you sell it, but there was nobody who would buy a business from a Jew, so he gave it to his employees, who were very good people and
So that
appreciated him very much. And one of the men, Mr. Horlitz, even went to Switzerland to bring, to take some of the, send some of the money that they still took in that my father should have had, and sent it from Switzerland to America, which he did under his own. I mean, it was very risky for him to do that.
I think he was a good man. But there was another guy there called Mr. Wallach. Remember him?
Yeah.
He was a real Nazi.
He in the picture?
I don't think he
I
was.
think he was, yeah, the cutter.
Is that Wallach? Because at Mr. Horlitz, I remember that we went to his business before they took it over, so to speak. And that Horlitz would say to that Wallach, see what you've done? You've taken it away from this nice family, and now these, and that was already then my father, I think, was planning to send us to England, and he would say, see what you've done.
After when he realized that he had to give up his business and couldn't support us basically in Germany without any income, he realized that he had to leave. Now we had to wait for affidavits to come through from the uncles who had gone to America, and that didn't work so fast. And so in the meantime, they decided to dissolve also our apartment and ship whatever furniture we could get out of Berlin. And this we could only do because we were of the Danzig nationality. Germans could not keep or send anything away. We could keep our silver and valuables, which the German Jews all had to give to the government.
Yeah, it says on this sheet, it said February 21st, 1939, Jews of German nationality must surrender all items of gold, silver, and platinum, as well as pearls and precious stones, within 2 weeks to state purchasing agencies. An exception will be made for wedding rings only. So you didn't, because you were from Danzig?
We did not, and my father wanted to trade the candlesticks with my grandmother, and she was so scared, and my father would have taken other things from her, but she was so scared to not give it to the German state that she would be put into jail for not complying with those orders, that she, I think the only thing that she did trade with was the candlesticks.
Yeah, and luckily we still have those candlesticks. They're beautiful and tall, but for a change, my father gave her some so that it wouldn't look that she didn't have any, but he gave her some little ones.
How did they know what you had?
They probably figured all Jewish households had candlesticks for Friday night.
So getting back to the Kristallnacht, do you remember anything?
Yes,
The night of broken glass?
I went by that time to the Jewish school, and we had to take the elevated train, which took us by a synagogue in the Fasanstraße, and the synagogue was on fire, which we didn't realize, and we couldn't figure out why the fire engines were standing next to it, but didn't put the fire out. And when we got to school, everybody was in an uproar and said, you go back home and you stay home until things calm down and quieten down, and don't go any other place, just go straight home the fastest way you possibly can. And we all arrived back home, and I think my father at that point was at home too, and hid at my grandmother's house, because there were only women living in the house, because they were so afraid they would come and put all the men into jail. And
so at that time, were you at the same school? Do you remember the same thing? Did you?
I went
Remember
to the
that
Sprachenschule am Zoo
Eva went to a different school
at that point.
I was still in that school in Grunewald, which was also about 40 minutes from our house. And I remember that out there, I don't think they knew about it immediately, because they didn't break the glass in this sort of a suburb. But then they must have heard by radio, I don't know how, anyhow, they all sent us home too. And I remember, I don't know if it was that evening or the next morning, my father took us on the streetcar or a bus and said, well, you don't say anything, but just observe. You got to remember what they did.
We walked all through the Kurfürstendamm and around the zoo, and where there were beautiful, I remember a store with perfumes, French perfumes, and they were all lying on the street and all broken totally. And I think a little bottle of a perfume was in those days already very expensive, and my parents just could not understand how anybody could do anything like that.
So at that point, your father really wanted to leave Germany?
Right, and then I think he did wire to my uncles in America to send us affidavits and to put everything into,
I think
organize it that we would leave.
Did you notice that any of your girlfriends, Jewish girlfriends, were leaving and?
People would just disappear and hardly come and say goodbye. And I remember my very best girlfriend coming to say goodbye to us, and that my mother was so terribly upset. And by that time, I was so ready that I wanted to get out of there too, because whatever you wanted to do as a teenager, you just couldn't do. My mother wouldn't even let me go to the park by myself anymore. She was afraid. I know she followed me once with you and Dodi, which I realized that she was following me, but of course it was against my honor that have my mother watch over me. But everybody was so afraid that you would just disappear. That's what happened to people. Teachers disappeared.
Yeah, you would come to school,
and the teacher was gone.
And then you didn't know where they put in a camp, or did they leave, or nobody really discussed it. And then, but I give that lady a lot of credit. The principal, her name was Dr. Leonora Goldschmidt. She kept that school going till I believe 30 after we left, and then just recently, maybe a couple of years now, we heard from her son, who lives in England, I think, and he told us that she then went to England, but and started a school there, but she must have been some tough lady.
She had some English teachers who were teaching us English history and English colloquial language, that we would learn English really very well. They stressed learning English and Hebrew, because a lot of people went to Palestine in those days and others went to English-speaking countries. So we were drilled in English. And I found the Jewish school much harder than the German Lyceum to keep up with my studies. And
Did you say you studied some Jewish subjects at the Jewish school?
Right.
I had every first hour we had Jewish religion, history, and then we learned Hebrew.
So then maybe did people become more Jewish during the Hitler era?
Yes.
Because
we sort of initiated that our parents would keep all the Jewish holidays and
Well, I think our father did. He would. I know he went to synagogue. I think he was a member, because I know he would be on the bima holding the Torah sometimes. And we went before that for a long time. Before I went to the Jewish school, I went to Hebrew school after school. And I remember still the teacher's name was Herr Wachsmann.
well,
And
in the German school system, they taught you religion. We were separated into 3 groups. Jewish, Catholic, and Protestant, and every day started out the first hour, and we, since Jews were the minority at that point, we were the lucky kids who had the Jewish religious instruction with boys together, and had to go to a different building. And in the early days that I remember from my German school, it was during the school hours. Then after 1933, they could not drop us totally, and we had, like you said, a special, but it was through the public school system, and that wasn't by choice.
I was 7 years old,
yeah.
So
we
I
had
remember
to do
that I enjoyed it, except I remember that he wouldn't hit the girls, but he had
hit the boys.
he had a stick, and he would hit the boys
That-
if they didn't.
That was at the Hebrew school?
Mhm.
That was through the
Jewish
synagogue?
literature.
We
No,
had-
this was from the
Yeah.
public education, but he
That-
wasn't. I don't know whatever happened to him, but he was
He was a public school teacher.
probably.
I think probably that the boys, there was no law against capital punishment.
Did you have to sit toward the back of the room at in the late 30s? Because you were Jewish, I know Brigitte said she had to do that in Danzig. You didn't have anything like that?
I think it was better in the big towns, because when we went to the Jewish school, I realized several of my friends were from small towns where the girls and boys were not allowed to go to the public schools anymore, so to get some sort of education they had to be sent to Berlin. And there was a, what do you call it, where you sleep to?
Boarding school?
Boarding
They
school.
had
The
they
school had a
in-
boarding
yeah,
school
in
besides,
the
and I had
Schmidt-Schule.
I had a girlfriend who came from Hamburg. Her parents were still in Hamburg, and she would live in this dormitory and during the week, and then on weekends and holidays she went back home to Hamburg. And all the smaller cities and towns sort of, I think the Jews realized what was happening faster than in the capital in Berlin, because there were so many people, and you sort of,
Could hide in the...
well, you didn't really hide. You weren't as noticeable.
Obvious.
Not everybody knew who you were, while in a small town, the few Jewish families would be usually the more wealthy ones, and that way. That's why our grandmother moved from Schlawe to Berlin.
And in the Goldschmidt-Schule, did they have sporting events with other Jewish schools? Or
Yeah, we had a lot of that. The some children belonged to the Maccabees, and I know our friend in Israel, Illa, that was a big group of kids who would do that after school. They were very sports-minded, but the school themselves, we had track teams, and mainly it was track, was running and
Gymnastics too.
gymnastics, right? And they would then get together with only compete with other Jewish schools, and there were some right next to us was a school called Kaliski, which wasn't far from us. Our cousins went to that one. They just sprung up all over, but mainly in the outlying areas. And there was another one, Lehman Schule, and then we had uniforms. I remember our shorts were green, and
But only for sports.
Yeah.
Not,
So-
and it was that part I remember. You would feel like you were in a different world, because you forgot about all of this, what was going on, because there was always something going on in your home when you came home. Some friend was deported, or some good friend left, or somebody had something happen to them. So there was, and then at night my father would listen to the shortwave radio, and all these little things that your life was not normal. I don't think like our children have had the fortune of having America.
When was the first time you realized you might leave Germany? Did your parents mention it to you?
Well, at the Kristallnacht, I think it was understood that eventually everybody would go out. I think my father would have followed his brothers in any case, but because the family was so close, and still is, we just had a 50th year reunion and managed to get 86 people come together.
How did your parents explain how you would be leaving Germany?
My father said, I guess those things were passed on by word of mouth, that since they couldn't leave immediately and things were getting tighter and tighter, that it would be advantageous for us three children to leave first. And the connection of the Jewish Federation and the Quakers were sending children's transports, which meant children between the ages of 1 and, I think they had to be able to walk, 1 and 18, without passports and visas, to England and to Holland. Because it would take years to get a passport if you didn't have one already, and it would take even longer to get visas, because all of a sudden everybody wanted to leave. The Germans wanted to exterminate you, but they didn't want you to get out either. So it was understood that if the three of us would leave, it would make things easier for our parents. So in the beginning of June, we were registered to go with this children's transport to England, where our uncle, one of my father's brothers, sent an official statement that he would support us if once we arrived there. So the date our transport left was June 14th. So the week before, my parents packed up all our belongings and left the rest in the apartment. And as they took us to the train station, the apartment, and moved into a hotel. And
what I remember is that we got all new clothes to take with us, new dresses, all kinds of beautiful things. We would have never gotten that many dresses in one time, even though I think we were well-to-do. It was different than here, where my grandchildren, I don't know, have how many dresses. We had maybe one good dress and some
school dresses.
We always had nice clothes, but anyway, that stands out in my mind. My mother must have bought me 10 different outfits, and everything was shoved. I mean, it was put in very nicely into one suitcase. That's all we could take. And then I was almost 13, so I was really big enough to carry my own suitcase. When I see bat mitzvah girls here, like Friday night at our temple, they look mature and grown up. But I was very innocent. I was like a child. I was not mature. What I think
we were not as sophisticated in those
We really
days.
didn't have, I really didn't know much about the facts of life. I remember my mother taking me to my uncle, who was a doctor before we left, and he was supposed to tell me what would happen to a young girl. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I thought, what's he talking about? And I thought, well, fine, I listened, because we were used to respect older people, and I thought, okay, I'm supposed to listen to this. And so that was another thing. I was very unprepared for life, I think. And then the last thing my father said to poor Eva, you carry her suitcase. like she was so strong or something. But I think I just thought, yeah, she's going to take care of me now. I was like a little kid. And I always feel bad that she had to do that.
That wasn't the problem. Was carrying a suitcase is nothing, but when we got by train to Bremerhaven, we had to go through customs, and all these wonderful things that our parents had so carefully packed for us and very neatly put in, the German custom people just took two hands and messed up, looked through it, picked up every item, and the most embarrassing things they would pick up and say, what do you need this for, and what do you do with that? And they were looking for gold and silver, being worried that we would smuggle that out. And in Bremerhaven we went onto the Queen Elizabeth II, and was 120 children on that boat. They were all running wildly all over the place, and got very most of them got very seasick. I did not. And I remember that I was so happy when we finally landed in Southampton, and our uncle and aunt picked us up at the boat. And to get off this boat, which was a holy mess after that, crossing of the channel, one of the children had come down with scarlet fever or chicken pox, and they put us in quarantine. And so we sat 6 hours, I think, on the boat till they figured out which children had must have been chicken pox, because we've had it. And then finally, when they established that we all had, all three of us had chicken pox, they would let us off the boat. And I remember my aunt almost being in hysterics, getting sick children to take care of. But we were very happy and in good shape.
Well, to go back a little, Eva mentioned that when you left, you went on a platform, and certain things stand out in your mind. Our platform must have been higher, and you looked down, and there were all these parents standing.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't go any further, and
we were afraid to wave to them, even not to implicate them.
What I probably in my mind always knew my parents would follow us, because that's what they told us, and that's what they did. But I think the majority of those children, and we just had a reunion of these kinder transport, a majority of them never saw their parents again. And that was the last glimpse they had. And I was reading just recently, one of these children wrote about her account of this saying goodbye, and she said her father jumped on the train, was held onto the back of the train, rode all the way to the border, in our case Bremerhaven, I guess, and made sure that the daughter got onto free land, and then he went back. Now I can understand how that must have been for parents, how they could have done that. Some of these children were 3, 4 years old, and having had your own children, I think they were very brave to do that.
It must have been the worst day in their lives. I mean, we might not have realized that they would not follow us. I also felt, well, my uncles had sent the affidavit, and whenever that came through, they would come and pick us up in England, and we would go right on to America. But I would imagine that our parents felt much more strongly that they might never get out of Germany, and that respect never see us again.
How about your grandmother and your Aunt Nanny and Kata? Did you remember saying goodbye to them? Did you think that you would see them again? Or?
I don't think I felt very bad saying goodbye to that grandmother.
By that time you sort of were so conditioned to say goodbye to everybody that you felt you didn't want to say goodbye to anybody in the first place. And I don't know what we thought, if they would come out, if they would not come out, what they did.
I really thought I would never see them again. And I think that's why we're now, when somebody comes to visit us from that family, we have a very close feeling, because that's all that's left. Even though sometimes, we might not like them as much, or for whatever reason, although I do like them. And I can't sometimes understand that my own children, they don't even want to see them. And I don't think, it's not you, George, I'm not talking about you. I think that they don't have that understanding. And I think it's something that we went through that'll be with us for the rest of our lives. You feel, well, the grandmother didn't make it, the daughters, which were our aunts, didn't make it, the grandchildren did make it. We have to keep that connection going. And I know the way they were raised, our children were also raised with a strong family feeling, but unless you live through it, I don't think you, and even all these Ankers, my father's relatives, and they're all over the world, I think I have a close feeling to them. Sometimes I have nothing in common with them, with my first cousins, I feel. They are completely different. Their values are different or whatever, but there's that closeness that somehow you just can't get rid of that.
So when you got to England, what did you do in the first week? Where did you stay?
We stayed with his uncle and aunt.
I don't even think I stayed there a week.
I don't think so either.
I think they got rid of me as soon as
they took both Hilda and Dodie and Hilda right away to this boarding school where our other cousins were already, who had left Berlin a couple of months or maybe 4 months before ourselves. And but I was too old, so I stayed with them, and they tried to find a place where I could stay au pair. And I remember taking the headmaster of the boarding school that Hilda went to, wanted somebody to come and look after his children, and my Aunt Rosa took me there. Something must not have appealed to me about this man.
He was terrible. Mr. Green was his name.
Right. By my expression, my aunt blamed me that he would not take me into his home. And of course they felt badly having a 17-year-old girl on their hands, not knowing what to do with her. And nobody could pay for another one at a boarding school, so I was considered being old enough that I had learned enough and I could work now. But then I went back to my uncle in London, and he was awfully nice to me and said something else will come up and don't worry about it. And in the meantime I looked at London, went to visit all the museums and enjoyed my cousins. And then one of the other people whose son was going also to this same boarding school in Broadstairs needed somebody. He had 3 children and was a vicar and lived about an hour south from London at Kirtford. And my uncle took me out there, and I just loved the countryside. It was so green and beautiful, and they had all sorts of animals, and coming from a city in Berlin, living in an apartment, I had never experienced being out in the country. So I must have shown that I liked that place. And so I went back with my uncle and packed my suitcase up again, and then the next day took the train and went. And I stayed there, which we thought would be a few weeks or months at the most till our parents would come so that we could go to America. But then the war broke out, and we ended up spending 15 months in England. And these people, the side bosses, kept me the whole time. And our parents were fortunate to get out a week before the war broke out. They, when the Polish consul called my father to tell him that he had to come and hand in his passport because Hitler was marching into Danzig the next day, my father said, "I will do this, and thank you for letting me know." And with that, my mother and my father flew from Berlin to Denmark, where you could go with a Danzig passport without a visa.
I thought that a guy from the police station came and warned him that the next day he would have to come and take his passport away.
The consul called him to tell him to hand it in. And
I've heard a different story.
So did they were able to go to Denmark with it?
They went to
Jews.
Denmark.
Jews weren't allowed to travel then, though.
No, and they all they could take was 10 German marks with them, and also one suitcase that they could carry.
Also, my father said to the guy at the airport that he wasn't Jewish, although
He asked
looked
him.
very Jewish.
He
And
asked-
my mother didn't look Jewish, I don't think.
So
But they completely searched them and undressed them, and they asked my father at the border if he was Jewish, and he said no. And when he got into the Danish side, they said, "What are you doing, traveling with 10 marks to Denmark? The war is going to break out very quickly." And my father said, "Well, I need a well-deserved vacation, and that's what I'm doing right now. And if you let me come into your country, I will tell you the reason why." And the Danish
border.
border official let him in and said, "So, what's the story?" And my father says, "I'm Jewish and I have to get out of Germany." And he had the address of a business associate of my uncle's in Copenhagen, and he called him, and they picked him up at the airport and let him stay with them.
I thought it was those Kaufmans. They stayed in
It was the guy that Franz had studied with when he was at that brewery at the time.
So you said you got 2 postcards in one day, Eva, from your
I
parents?
got a long letter from my mother from Berlin writing me the same things, that she was meeting her cousin and they were going to take a walk, and then they were going to have a cup of coffee in one of the restaurants, and nothing was happening at all. And in the same mail I got a postcard, "You don't have to worry anymore, we are safe in Copenhagen," and Uncle Leo had sent some money, and they were hoping that now that war was imminent, that the visa for England was coming through pretty quickly. And it did. After I was so confused though with this message that I called my uncle in London and asked him what was going on, and he explained the situation to me.
So how did they get from Denmark to England? They needed a visa?
Right. So you could only get to England with visa.
So it did come through because of the
Through, I
affidavit?
think 5 days later.
Well, I think they were there longer, because I know that we wrote letters to Copenhagen from the boarding school, and they would never let us write any letters there. That was a terrible school, unless we ate all our food, and sometimes I couldn't eat that horrible food. We would stuff it in our pockets, and Elsa, that was my cousin, we would both throw it out in the toilet or somewhere, and then we got paper to write home to our parents. They were, I don't understand how they knew what we had gone through, yet I think they must have been anti-Semites. But the whole the only reason that school could exist in a way was there were many Jewish kids in there. We were all the same kind of kids from Germany without our parents. And
I don't think they were.
Boarding school. How long did you stay there then, Mom?
well, like Eva said, 15 months. Maybe I'm confusing letter
No,
writing.
you didn't stay
Oh,
the
wait, I
15 months.
didn't.
They threw you out, or did our parents, when they came, they took you out of there because it was so expensive.
Yeah.
And then when the war broke out, and during the Blitz, and then you came to Kirtford
Well, I
and
went
stayed
to
with me.
different places. I know that I went.
Yeah.
Eva's right. I was there a while. Then I went. When my parents came, first they came to Broadstairs. That's where the school was. And then after a while, they moved back to London. And then they took me with them. And then
Dodie too.
yeah. And then in London, I lived in Holm, but they couldn't find a school to put me in. For some
That's when you
reason, they
came.
didn't want any. Maybe it was Germans, probably.
Yeah.
Anyhow, they found some little school I went to for a little while, a very small private school. I didn't go to school again. And they sent me to the farm for a while, and I stayed there. And then my parents, I think, thought I better go to school where Eva was, and that big car took
Went to
me
the
in
village
also.
school.
Yeah, and I guess I learned something, but
You
I
were the
sometimes
smartest
think
kid in that school.
for 2 years I really had no schooling, and I always think it really kind of amazing I could get along at school.
How come, like your cousin Elsa, her parents were in London? Why didn't she live with them? Why did they send her to a boarding school?
Well, they also came by themselves at
Yeah,
first,
at
and
first.
everybody was sent somewhere because my uncle in England couldn't really take care of them.
No.
But he arranged to put us in this school, and Elsa and I slept right next to each other. And she was funny because she always just wanted to talk in English, and I didn't understand the word. She'd been there all of maybe 2 months ahead of me. And
2 months was long enough.
yeah,
long enough
she
to
knew
learn
more
English.
English
Yeah.
than I did, because they would punish us if we were talking German. But that was some security to have your cousin there. We would take walks together. It was a big
Yeah.
place, and it was by the sea, by the English Channel.
Where did Dodie live during this time?
In the same school, only she was too old. She lived in the boys' school. I don't really know why they put her there.
And there was also one other girl that she lived together with. She made a friend. I forget the girl's name. But
So-
I have pictures of her in that school.
Do you remember when your parents arrived in England then? Did you see them right away?
They came to Broadstairs. I don't know.
I didn't see them
must
till
have seen them
at least
later.
a week later when they were back in London. I took the train. The problem always was money. We had no way of earning any money. We did not get work permits. And what I did was for my room and board. And I think my uncle sent me some money so that I could take the train and visit my parents. And I remember that I was sort of appalled after having seen them last in our beautiful apartment in Berlin. And here they were living in a very dingy little place in the basement in some house where I think they didn't even have a real bedroom. They had sort of a sitting room that pulled out a bed, and I thought it was terrible, and how they could stay there. And yet I guess being sort of selfish and 17, I was glad I went back to the Side Blossoms where I had a nice room in a big house, and they were treating me awfully well, and I had a good time with them.
So did your parents tell you all along that you'd be going up?
And the,
But we
pro-
just couldn't go.
the problem was once, 'cause we had tickets to go to America via the Panama Canal, which were all paid in German money. And of course, once the war broke out, they weren't valid. Nobody could go that way. So now we had to find passage from England to America, which was very difficult. Then our visas for America had run out. And by the time we got new visas put in, we had to find a way to get across the ocean. And it was all during the war, and we did not know what boat we would go on. We were told one day to be in Liverpool at a certain time and a certain date and be in this rooming house, and then somebody would come and pick us up there. It was all very hushed up. We went on a freighter in a convoy.
Here's the picture. So what was the name of the boat?
It was called
The Nova Scotia.
And it was just a teeny old boat. And there were, I think maybe 60 children on the boat. And they were English children, and it's sort of like deja vu in a way. They were now the children having to flee their land because of the Blitz. It wasn't quite the same.
They were going to Canada because our boat landed first in Canada. We also had 100 Dutch sailors on our boat who were going to Canada for training.
But they were originally from Sumatra. They were not. They were
Dutch Indies.
Yeah.
You
Dutch West Indies or East
I-
Indies.
I have an essay that you wrote in high school. You told about your trip. You said you were almost torpedoed. You
Yeah.
had to get up at 4:30. Alarm bell went off.
We had a lot of drills, I remember.
And we saw two boats being torpedoed in our convoy.
Just saw the boats
And then
cracked
everybody,
in half.
This was October 1940.
That was right
we
after
left Liverpool
the-
October 5th.
The German submarines were very capable. I think the Americans were really worried about them, and they did sink a lot of ships. And they were also afraid that they would come into America. And later on, they were afraid the same on the West Coast that the Japanese would come here. And you still see some fortifications here on the beaches, on some areas. That's from World War II.
San Francisco.
So you finally you arrived in the United States in October 1940.
Right.
And do
Boston.
you remember
Landed in Boston.
how you felt when you finally reached the United States?
That was wonderful. It was the first lights we saw when we reached Boston Harbor. Up till then, we were in complete blackout. My father could not even smoke a cigarette on deck.
Which was good.
Well,
didn't
he smoked
think
them
so.
out in the cabin underneath.
He,
And then Boston, my uncles wanted my father to go to New York, but the English pound was just being devalued, so we again had no money. So my father decided we better come straight across the United States to get to California. And we didn't even spend the night in Boston. We went by Greyhound bus to Buffalo because my father did want to see Niagara Falls, and we stopped there. And we're in a terrible rooming house where we got bitten by bed bugs.
I remember arriving in Boston. It was the
Ladies.
captain of our boat. I remember that. He said a prayer that we had arrived safe. And I was, I think that was pretty emotional. And then we were greeted on dockside by a Jewish, very well-dressed woman was from must have been the HIAS, the Jewish Federation for Refugees, and she was going to really put us up, and our parents in some home and us girls in another home, and my father wouldn't do it. And in retrospect,
We didn't want to be split up
yeah,
again.
I think he should have done that. In retrospect, we probably would have seen Boston. We probably would have been together in the evenings or sightseeing, but they were so unhappy, like Eva said, that we wouldn't be together. But you could see now, if some families would say, come here, we've seen that you couldn't take in a whole family. You might say between the two of us, we might take the parents and you the children, but you look at it from a different point of view now.
So you came across country and you
Greyhound
came to your relatives in California.
Right.
And did you all stay together once you arrived here, or were you split up again?
Once we arrived here, Hilda and I stayed with one uncle, and my parents and our other sister stayed with another uncle. What impressed me the very most is that when we arrived in Los Angeles, my aunt had stayed at home, and she had a table with food like we hadn't seen, because before we left Germany, everything was rationed. When we were in England, everything was rationed. And on the trip across country, not having any money, and my mother and sisters being always car sick and seasick, I was forever hungry. And when we arrived, I was so overwhelmed by all this food that she had put out that I must have been speechless.
That was Tante Lena?
No, Tante Herta.
I remember even just coming cross country, even though you
Right.
say I couldn't eat, but I remember seeing fruit stands, and we would stop and buy pears. It must have been the season in October. Anyway, here we are, and we lived happily ever after.
So does it seem, does it seem like 50 years since?
Yes.
50 years, look at us. It seems
50 years in the United States. We made it.
That's why
You have a son, a lawyer, a son, a doctor, and a very, very well-to-do son in the water and power.
And my
And
nieces are all
We
teachers.
have a doctor.
We have a doctor.
We have
right?
2 teachers and 1 geologist, and we all did fine.
Members of the Jewish community were well known throughout the town. Business. My grandfather grew up in a large city. My grandmother, Trude Gottschalk, grew up in a small town of Schlava in Pomerania. Parents were Hugo and Bertha Gottschalk, Hugo being born in 1863 and Bertha in 1866 in Königsberg, East Prussia. It was also a beautiful city. The arrow points to where the synagogue used to stand. A river through the town. Good place. Beautiful houses. There was the city synagogue, seen in the upper right-hand corner. The synagogue was really beautiful. Sadly, it was destroyed in 1938 by the Nazis. My grandmother's family can be traced back to the middle 1700s. Here are her great-grandparents, Jacob and Henrietta Gottschalk, prosperous in their time and well known throughout their community in Stolp in Pomerania. Here seen at age 16, became a prosperous mill owner. first in Stolp and then in Schlava. Marriage was to Nanny Hyman in the early 1860s. Their first child was Hugo Gottschalk, my great-grandfather, over the operations of the Schlava mill from his father Benno. They often spoke how happy her time was on the mill. There was a little river running through the mill, which was full of eels, which they ate after they had smoked. There was a little garden which they used to play.